I don't tell jokes. I tell anecdotes and lies, but I don't tell jokes. Anyway, this is a joke. And it's not a joke, it's a story. It's a true story. It really happened.
Before he was George Burns. Before the cigars, the jokes, the Oscars, he was a boy who learned that laughter was the only currency that never ran out. George Burns was born Nathan Birnbaum on January 20th, 1896. In a tiny New York apartment on the Lower East Side, his parents, Dora and Louis, were immigrants from Eastern Europe, and their lives were defined by survival. 12 children packed into 3 rooms, barely enough food, barely enough heat, and a constant pressure to keep moving just to stay alive. Life taught him early that the world was harsh. At 8, his father died suddenly, leaving the family without money or stability. School ended after 5th grade. Nathan became a shoe shiner, earning 5 cents a shine, and the work was cold, dirty, and relentless. Sometimes the family had nothing but potatoes and onions for dinner. Sometimes bread felt like a luxury. But in that struggle, something else was born a spark. Nathan noticed how laughter could cut through the bleakest days. He began singing in a children's quartet, and even when a promoter stole their money, leaving him homeless, he kept moving. He slept in alleyways and learned hunger the way some people learn music. It wasn't just survival, it was training. He tried stage names, reinventing himself like a person changing clothes. He stole coal to keep his family warm. He even nearly drowned swimming the East River, but the fear made him feel alive. He wasn't born a comedian. He became one. And that journey starts with a simple truth. George Burns learned early that the world might break you. If you can still make people laugh, you can keep living. He walked onto a stage for the first time, and the crowd booed him so hard that pennies rained down. But that moment didn't break him. It made him unstoppable. At 14, George Burns ran away from home and joined the Mickey Rooney Stock Company, dreaming of becoming a singer. His first paid performance was in a Midwestern theater, and he was confident, even arrogant. But when the curtain rose, he froze. He forgot the lyrics. The audience didn't just dislike it, they rejected it. They booed. They laughed at him. They threw pennies at the stage like he was a joke they didn't want. He was fired instantly. Most people would have quit. Most people would have felt crushed, defeated, humiliated. But George didn't. He walked away with something stronger than his ego. Lesson he learned: the raw truth of show business. The stage doesn't care about your dreams. It cares about your performance. So he did what any survivor would do. He kept moving. He sang on ferry boats, in brothels, on street corners, anywhere that would pay him a little money. Some days he barely ate. Some nights he barely slept. But he kept going because the stage had become a part of him, and failure had become fuel. In 1913, he formed a singing trio called the Burning Three with 2 sisters. But the act collapsed when one of them eloped. Once again, he was stranded without cash and forced to beg for train fare home. Still, didn't quit. He used every setback as a stepping stone. He learned to improvise, to survive harsh crowds, to turn humiliation into momentum. And in that chaos, he discovered his most valuable skill. He could make people laugh even when he was falling apart. George Burns did not become famous by being the funniest man in the room. He became famous by knowing when to stop talking. After years of struggling solo acts and failed partnerships, George met a quiet, sharp-witted performer named Gracie Allen. On the surface, it looked like an odd match. George was smooth and observant. Gracie was unpredictable, innocent-sounding, and delightfully illogical. But together, they unlocked something powerful. At first, George tried to dominate the act. He delivered punchlines, controlled the rhythm, and stayed center stage. The audience laughed, but not enough. One night, something unexpected happened. Gracie interrupted him with a completely absurd line, and the room exploded with laughter. George paused. He listened. And then he did something most performers never do. He stepped back. Instead of competing for laughs, George let Gracie shine. He became the straight man, the calm observer, reacting to her nonsense with raised eyebrows and perfectly timed pauses. The laughs doubled, then tripled. The act transformed overnight. That decision changed his entire career by letting Gracie lead. George found his true power, control through restraint. His timing, his silence, his subtle reactions became just as funny as any joke. Audiences did not just laugh at Gracie. They laughed at George watching Gracie. Together, they conquered vaudeville, then radio, then film. Their chemistry felt effortless, but it was built on a rare skill. Knowing when to talk and when to stay quiet, George Burns had finally found his voice by learning how to use silence, and that silence would make him immortal. Radio turned George Burns and Gracie Allen into a national obsession when they moved from vaudeville to radio. In the 1930s, everything changed. There were no costumes, no physical comedy, no stage movement. It was only voices. That should have been a weakness. Instead, it became their greatest weapon. Gracie's confused logic sounded even funnier when listeners had to imagine it. George's calm, patient reactions felt intimate, like he was letting the audience in on the joke. People did not just listen. They leaned in. Their radio show became one of the most popular programs in America. Families planned their evenings around it. Catchphrases spread. Gracie's absurd answers became legendary. Behind the scenes, George handled everything. He wrote, produced, managed timing, and protected the act. Gracie trusted him completely. The success was not accidental. It was engineered with precision and care. By the time television arrived, they were no longer just entertainers. They were a fixture of American life, and George Burns was quietly preparing for his next reinvention. When television arrived, many radio stars panicked. What worked on the air often failed on camera. Burns and Allen embraced the risk. George made a bold decision. Instead of pretending television was radio with pictures, he broke the rules. He spoke directly to the audience, stepped in and out of scenes, and turned the show into something entirely new. Gracie remained the heart of it all. Her logic made even less sense when viewers could see her confidence and sincerity. She never winked at the joke. That innocence made everything funnier. The Burns and Allen Show became a massive hit. It influenced future sitcoms more than most people realize. Breaking the fourth wall, self-awareness, meta-humor, it all started here. Television did not replace their success. It amplified it. And once again, George Burns proved he could adapt while others faded away. Behind the laughter, pressure quietly built. Weekly television demanded perfection, timing, and endless energy. For George and Gracie, the workload was relentless. Gracie began to struggle. The strain of memorizing scripts and maintaining her signature rhythm became overwhelming. What audiences never saw was how exhausting it was for her to stay inside that world of controlled chaos. George noticed first. He watched his partner, his wife, begin to fade under the spotlight she once commanded. Protecting Gracie mattered more than ratings or fame. In 1958, at the height of their success, Gracie Allen retired. The decision shocked Hollywood. Walking away from a hit show was unheard of. But for George, there was no debate. The laughter mattered, but Gracie mattered more. With Gracie gone, the house grew quieter. George kept working, but something essential was missing. The timing, the spark, the beautiful chaos they had shared for decades was no longer there. He shifted into hosting and appearances, playing the straight man without the partner who made it magic. Audiences still loved him, but George knew the truth. The act was never just his. At home, his role changed completely. He became a caretaker, a protector, and a constant presence. Fame faded into the background. Gracie's comfort came first. Hollywood moved on quickly. New faces filled the screens. But George never chased relevance. He had already lived the career of a lifetime, and it was built on love, it's not applause. In the years that followed, George lived quietly, but his devotion never softened. Every morning followed the same gentle rhythm. He made sure Gracie was comfortable, listened to her stories even when they repeated, and laughed softly when flashes of her old wit surfaced. Those moments, brief but powerful, reminded him who she had always been. Friends who visited noticed something rare. There was no bitterness, no exhaustion in his voice. Caring for Gracie was not a burden to him. It was a continuation of the vows he had taken long before fame, awards, or applause entered their lives. He often said that love was not proven on stage, but in silence, when no one was watching. George turned down offers. Scripts piled up untouched. Invitations faded. He did not regret it for a second. The world had given him success once. Now it was his turn to give Summit. Every sacrifice felt small compared to the years of joy Gracie had given him. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit beside her bed and talk about the old days. About radio shows, crowded theaters, and jokes that once brought the country to laughter. Even if she could not fully respond, he believed she could feel it. Love, after all, does not require memory to exist. What made their story extraordinary was not the fame, but the endurance. In a town built on reinvention and abandonment, George stayed exactly where he was needed. Their marriage, tested by time and illness, became stronger in its quietest chapter. This was not a love story with a dramatic ending. It was something far rarer. A love that chose loyalty over legacy, presence over praise, and humanity over history. When the end finally came, it did not arrive with headlines or cameras. It came quietly, in a room filled with familiarity, where love had already done everything it could. Gracie's passing marked the close of a chapter that had lasted far longer than anyone expected. And yet it still felt sudden. George did not make speeches. He did not step into the spotlight to explain his grief. Instead, he disappeared even further from public view. Those closest to him said he carried the loss with a calm that was almost painful to witness. Decades of shared life do not leave all at once. They linger in habits, in empty chairs, in conversations that end too soon. Hollywood reacted the only way it knows how. Tributes poured in. Clips resurfaced. Fans shared memories, quotes, and laughter that had once filled living rooms across the country. But none of it captured the full weight of what was lost. The public mourned a star. George mourned a lifetime. For years, he had defined himself as a caregiver, a partner, a constant presence. When that role ended, there was a silence that no applause could replace. Friends noticed that time slowed for him. Days blended together. Yet even in grief, he never spoke of regret. He had been where he was needed most. There is a cruel truth about long love. When it ends, it leaves behind a space too large to fill. George did not try to replace it. He honored it by protecting their story from spectacle, keeping the most sacred moments private. Gracie's death did not just close a marriage. It ended an era built on loyalty, humor, and quiet strength. What remained was a man who had given everything, and a love that did not fade when the laughter stopped in the years that followed. George's life became smaller by design. Fewer appearances, fewer interviews. Fewer reasons to revisit a world that no longer felt essential. Fame had once given him everything, but love had given him purpose. Without it, the spotlight felt unnecessary. Those who expected a dramatic comeback never quite understood him. George had already lived several full lives: the rising star, the television icon, the devoted husband, the quiet caretaker. He was not chasing reinvention. He was protecting peace. Neighbors described him as gentle, routine-driven, and deeply private. He found comfort in ordinary rituals, morning walks, familiar meals, and simple conversations. These moments carried more weight than awards ever did. They reminded him that life did not end when the cameras stopped rolling. Fans still wondered if he missed the applause. But those closest to him knew the truth. The loudest chapter of his life had already passed. The most meaningful one never needed an audience. George's legacy was never just about laughter or ratings. It was about commitment, about choosing presence over praise, about staying when leaving would have been easier. In an industry built on exits, he remained. Not for a role, for a person. There is something quietly powerful about a man who walks away from fame without bitterness. George never spoke of sacrifice as loss. He spoke of it as love, and love to him had been worth everything. As time moved forward, his story softened into memory. Reruns continued. Quotes lived on. New generations discovered his work without knowing the full weight of what he had given up behind the scenes. But that was fine. Some stories are not meant to be fully seen. In the end, George Burns was not defined by how brightly he shined on screen, but by how steadily he stood beside the woman he loved when the lights went out. And long after the applause faded, that quiet devotion became the truest part of his legacy.
Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more dives into Hollywood's hidden history.